Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guests are Professor Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
And we have our man in Kiev, Ivan Kucherenko. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, Jonathan. Glad to be here. I'm currently not in Kiev. I'm in the western part of Ukraine on business trip, but anyway,
Good for
I'm
you.
here in Ukraine and on the edge of what's happening in this war.
How is the situation in western Ukraine? Is it very different from Kiev?
It's more calm here, actually, because more aerial threats from Russia. Russia currently doesn't have such much opportunities to strike deep into the western parts of Ukraine, and they mostly use cruise missiles for striking western part of Ukraine, like their Kinjal missiles. But recent analytics I read showed that Ukraine developed a technology of electronic warfare, which allows to distract Kinjal missiles from their targets, and recently during the last 6 months, like more than 20 Kinjal missiles were actually distracted from their targets, and it's a very expensive loss for Russia, because every Kinjal missile costs several $millions to produce, and Russia pays even more price because of the sanctions, and because of that they have to find those electronic components, how to smuggle them into Russian territory. So they actually stopped striking on the western parts, and they are mostly focused on Shahid attacks on the central, eastern, northern parts of Ukraine. Southern, of course, Odessa recently, and it was a huge strike on Odessa, and more than around 10 people were killed there by Russian attack. And on Kiev, actually, a recent strike, and they used ballistic missiles as well, and it's a real problem for Ukraine because the most effective solution for intercepting ballistic missiles is Patriot systems, and Patriot system now, because of war in Iran, actually is a shortage of interceptor missiles for Patriot systems. But in a recent interview, President Zelensky confirmed that Ukraine is working on our own analog of Patriot system, and within a year probably we will have such solution, and it's actually inspiring them, because in this way we will not be dependent from the United States on support of interceptor missiles, because now mostly Ukraine buys Patriot missiles, some equipment for F-16 interceptors from the United States, and but the majority of ammo, of weapons, Ukraine is buying from European countries, or producing ourselves, because the production of weapons in Ukraine actually increased significantly from the start of Russian full-scale invasion. One of the goals of which was demilitarization of Ukraine. As a result, Ukrainian weapon-producing industry growth several times, or even several dozen times, and Russia faces Ukrainian attacks almost every day. You've probably seen those post-apocalyptic videos from Tuapse, where the oil refinery, the port infrastructure, they're actually burning, like in some kind of post-apocalyptic movie, and Russians are screaming about that and blaming Putin. Actually, blaming their government, which is a good sign because the rating of Putin is constantly decreasing now in Russia.
The latest information that I heard from the Russian sources, by the way, is that there is a huge opposition to Putin regarding the Ukrainian war. The opposition is that the war could end it long time ago if Putin would show more resolve and being more aggressive and so on. Although it's difficult to imagine how it could be even more aggressive. However,
faster?
What these commentators are saying that the West has to be grateful to Putin, the way he loves peace and the way he conducts himself. So Ukraine is still around and hasn't been destroyed and made into rubble or so on. But speaking about demilitarization, I think we are going to witness very soon the militarization of Russia, because they're running out of funds. They have no money. Here comes demilitarization of Russia, second to none. And what's interesting is that Ukraine contributes a lot to this new information, because
not only money, Sasha. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's really important thing that as the Western countries, the countries of the Gulf, the United States, they faced the problem of intercepting cheap Shahed drones with very expensive Patriot interceptor missiles. Ukraine faced the same situation in the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, when Russia started to massively attack Ukraine by Shahed drones. It was like middle of the 2022, almost more than 4 years ago. But Ukraine actually invented last year, Ukraine invented a very cheap. Before that, there were several solutions which allows to effectively intercept Shahed drones. And the last year, Ukraine invented the most effective solution, which is drone interceptors, because they cost much cheaper than the Shahed drone. It's easy to produce them massively. A lot of Ukrainian companies now are producing them, and the effectiveness of intercepting Shahed drones with drone interceptors is like 90%. So they're intercepting.
I totally agree.
Yeah, but Russia, they didn't worked on such kind of technology to intercept Ukrainian drones. They were still using missiles which were expensive for their like Panzer air defense systems or their SAM missile systems. They've used missiles to intercept Ukrainian drones. And now, why those Ukrainian attacks on Tuapse, on Russian on other Russian oil refineries became actually possible? Now Russia have no interceptor missiles for their Panzer systems. They're staying. First of all, Ukraine is constantly destroying their air defense systems. They're constantly destroying radar systems for intercept for air defense systems, and they actually flew the same tactics which Russia brought to Ukraine. Now Ukraine reacts with the same tactics. Ukraine is flooding the Russian air defense system with cheap drones, massive, like several hundreds drones flying every night over Russia, and Russia has no missiles to intercept them. That's why we almost every morning we see all those great pictures, videos burning Russian oil industry and oil
This is
infrastructure.
exactly what I wanted to mention. That the one reason that Russia is running out of money is that in spite of removal all the barriers, so Russia now can practically sell as much oil on the world markets as it can deliver. The problem is exactly with delivery. There is not much delivery happening because of Ukrainian drones attack on all these refineries and so on. So this is actually, by the way, Jonathan, I think I read somewhere that Trump is irritated by this situation because he needs more oil on the world market, so the price will go lower somewhat, right? And Russia could sell a lot of oil. It could, if it wouldn't be for Ukrainian drone attacks.
I mean, it's practically comical, Sasha, because no matter where you look in the Russian-Ukrainian war, the Ukrainians have successfully turned the tables on the Russians. They have turned the situation around so much that what I like to call now the correlation of forces. The correlation of forces has not only shifted in favor of Ukraine, but that trend is accelerating. That it is changing even faster in favor of Ukraine than before, and in all respects. So now, what we may well see, contrary to what most Western analysts were expecting, is an actual possibility of an outright Ukrainian military victory in the Russian-Ukrainian war, and all the pieces are being set in place for it, and we can now, as I've been contending for quite some time, we are going to finally see a decisive counteroffensive, in addition to the local successes in counteroffensives, which Ukraine is currently experiencing, to where I'm still watching and waiting and seeing the stage being set for that decisive offensive, which cuts off Crimea and recovers it back to Ukraine. And it's just amazing to watch.
Jonathan, I think Ukrainians are not in a hurry right now.
No, they don't need to be.
With the removal of Orban, now there are no barriers anymore for Ukraine to get first tranche of $120 billion from European Union.
They've got no cash problem.
Yeah, it should be advanced almost any time, beginning of May, most likely. And, that would definitely help Ukrainian a lot to continue its war and to prevail, actually. So if, like before, they were trying to resist Russian occupation, not anymore. I think today there is a basis for Ukraine started slowly to free its territory from Russian occupants. And once that process will start, I have a feeling that Russians have no way to resist Ukrainian attacks except that just running back to Russia, to their own borders. I don't know what else they can do.
And if they do that, Sasha, one of the smartest things that I think Ukraine could do, once they execute those successful counteroffensives and succeed in driving Russia out of Ukraine, then they would do well to not repeat the mistake that the United States made in the Korean War. Remember when they launched that counteroffensive at the Incheon invasion, and MacArthur and his forces were driving the North Koreans out of South Korea, and they continued advancing into North Korea. And they advanced all the way. They were advancing close to the Chinese border, and MacArthur was getting a little bit out of control. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff were saying you shouldn't do this. And as you know, the Chinese eventually invaded, and they intervened. And as a result, in that counteroffensive, we ended up having a Korean War going much longer than expected. So if Ukraine simply retakes all of its territory and does not invade Russia Russia proper in any respect, which I think they would be perfectly happy not to invade Russia. Just get them all out of there, and then make them declare peace and go home.
Go back to Moscow.
Yeah.
All Russian soldiers flying from the Ukrainian army are welcome to go to Moscow and ask Putin what they were fighting for during all those 5 years. The same situation like in Korean War, actually, not a lot of people remember that, and our audience probably was not much into the start of this Russian invasion to Ukraine, which actually started in 2014, when first of all Russian-backed separatist forces were fighting on the eastern part of Ukraine, and then Ukraine prepared our own forces. Ukrainian army advanced and almost kicked them all from the Ukraine, almost liberated all the territory there, and then Russian regular forces invaded. Actually, in 2014, Russia used the regular forces on the eastern part of Ukraine. They were no more Russian-backed separatists, but Russian regular forces, which invaded Ukraine, and there were those very sad situation in Debaltseva when Ukrainian forces were encircled, and Russian they've promised them an escape corridor, which escaped way, which Ukrainian soldiers could use to exit the surrounding. And when Ukrainian soldiers went through this corridor, Russians actually started to fire like in shooting range. It was one of their first Russian atrocities that they've committed on the territory of Ukraine. And actually, I've brought a video for today, which is particularly about that situation in the eastern part of Ukraine, in Donbass, but mostly about the present situation, why Russia is insisting on Ukraine to leave the territory which they cannot actually conquer in the military way. They want to get it in a political way with the assistance of Donald Trump and his advisors like Kushner, like Vitkov, which are actually taking Russian side, obviously, in that negotiation process. So we can watch this video in order for us to understand a little bit more about this situation.
Why are they asking Ukraine for help? Russia wants you to believe it's in a position of strength, but the reality is exactly the opposite, and here's why. This week, the Kremlin once again insisted Ukraine withdraw its troops from the Donbass region, giving a 2-month deadline and making all sorts of threats about the terrible things that will happen if they don't. But here's the thing, when it comes to the Donbass region, Russia is bluffing and it doesn't hold any cards. To understand why, you need to know about Ukraine's Fortress Belt. Ukraine's Fortress Belt is this kidney-shaped piece of land in Donetsk Oblast. It's 50 kilometers long and covers the cities of Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Turushivka, and Konstantinivka. Ukraine has spent more than a decade fortifying this area, and it remains, to this day, impenetrable by Russian forces. And don't forget, they've been trying to take the Donbass region since 2014 when they first invaded. Now, you might be looking at that map and thinking, well, why don't they just go around it? In short, they can't, because they're way weaker than they're trying to make out. Russia is advancing very, very slowly in the Donbass region, but it loses thousands of men every single week taking tiny pieces of land. Ukraine's drones have made big Russian attacks using tanks and armored vehicles next to impossible. They just get wiped out. Instead, Russia now relies on sending small groups of soldiers, sometimes just 1 or 2, to sneak towards Ukrainian lines and, if they don't get a drone in their face, wait for their mates to arrive. Militarily speaking, it's a truly fucking terrible way of advancing, and that's why so many Russian soldiers are dying for such tiny amounts of land. To take a significant chunk of land, like the chunk behind the Fortress Belt, they'd need an insane number of men, tanks, and other vehicles that they just don't have. To take the Fortress Belt itself, they'd need even more. That's why they're reduced to demanding that Ukraine just hand it over. And here's another thing. Russia is absolutely desperate, as its 2 other plans have already failed. The first of these was to convince Donald Trump to force Ukraine to withdraw from Donbass, and so far at least, this hasn't worked. worked. The second plan was to bomb Ukraine's population into submission over the winter, and as you can see, that also failed. This is Russia's last-ditch attempt at achieving the very minimum it needs to declare victory in Ukraine, literally asking Ukraine to do what it can't do itself. See it for what it is, fucking pathetic.
Nice try.
True words.
That's a heck of a closing line.
It's true. It's unthinkable. Okay, John, can you imagine that let's say in the First World War, when it was a huge fight on Somme, and German would ask French, come on, why don't you move a little bit farther so we would take this territory? Please do it. Oh, you don't want to do it? Oh, well, nothing can be done.
Well, World War One, as you well know, was full of senseless offensives in which the Germans and the French and the British were fighting over every pile of stones and every heap of bricks, as one person put it. And World War One, if it were possible, was even more insane than what is going on currently in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Except all the insanity is on the part of the Russians. It's one-sided insanity. The Russians just keep moving forward and taking absolutely mind-blowing casualties. At least for those of us who weren't around for the First World War, we're seeing its analog, its equivalent in the 21st century in the Russian-Ukrainian war. And fortunately, Ukraine is on the winning side of this equation. So right now, again, we have a situation where the Ukrainians, contrary to President Trump's assertion last year, it's not that Ukraine doesn't have any cards. They have all the good, strong cards now. And the Russians are clearly shown as having the weaker hand. So now,
sorry, Jonathan,
Sure.
argument that Russians wanted to have this Ukrainian war so they would train their army how to fight properly, and so then when they will attack Western Europe and Baltic states and whatever, they will have all the experience or so. Well, you know what's the problem with this explanation is that those people who started this war in 2022, they're all done. They're no longer alive. So they got experience, but they cannot use the experience because they're dead. Okay,
Correct.
so now people who are fighting now, they are getting experience, but they will be dead. It's on statistics. Each new Russian soldier arriving on Ukrainian front, his life expectancy is 12 days. So he will get 12 days full experience, and on the 13th day, he's dead. So who needs his experience? How he can use it?
It is, if one could have it's fortunate that we have sort of a sense of humor about this. If it weren't so absolutely pathetic and devastating, it's sad that the Ukrainian people have to suffer the consequences of Russian insanity. So it's unfortunate that Russia is reduced to conducting terror attacks to fight a war they never should have begun in the first place. But now it's on the positive side. Again, I'll look on the positive side for this. On the positive side, Ukraine has built up its military industry and so forth in such a way that it has become very attractive to Western powers, including the United States, I might add. And so that Ukraine is now, strangely enough, building the basis for post-war economic recovery, expansion, prosperity, and providing a real incentive for all those Ukrainians who had decided to flee Ukraine at the beginning of this war and during it, to return to Ukraine and help restore and rebuild a more prosperous and powerful Ukraine for the remainder of the 21st century. I think this is going to last and will make Ukraine one of the major powers in Europe. That is what I see as being the ultimate consequence of this. And particularly if Ukraine manages to play its cards even more cleverly and indirectly or directly assist the United States in its war with Iran and achieving peace and stability there. so that the price of oil comes down. Ukraine will benefit quite a bit from the post-war situation once the war in Ukraine is resolved and Ukraine is effectively brought to heel, and the threat to the world oil supply is permanently nullified. So I see potential very good long-term benefits for both the Ukraine and the United States, as well as for Europe, with a successful conclusion of this war. So right now, I am patiently and anxiously awaiting for Ukraine to strike the final decisive blow that forces the surrender of Russia.
Jonathan, this Iranian situation, I don't understand something. The U.S., together with Israel, they have overwhelming military advantage over Iran. It's not much. If people thought that Russia would have a great advantage over Ukraine, forget about that. There's a real advantage, like 10 to 1, 100 to 1, if you wish. You didn't take any number over Iran. Yeah. It's U.S. alone has that advantage, but addition of Israel brings more or less local knowledge of Iranians and geography and their customs and so on.
What I don't
understand with such an advantage and all the right cards, U.S. cannot solve this problem diplomatically. It just fails to do it. In the same team of Kushner and what's his name, Witkov, they're flying to Kyiv, they're flying to Kipr, they're flying to Iran, they're flying to Islamabad now, Pakistan and China probably next. Maybe something wrong with this team?
Well, Sasha, the only thing I would offer there is that this team, when you think about it diplomatically and in terms of war diplomacy, this is a team. I would almost call it a team of rookies that are desperately trying to learn as quickly as they can and become an experienced team, hopefully without creating too many decisive mistakes. And for the most part, the overwhelming military superiority of the U.S. over Iran, and especially in combination with its ally Israel, is large enough that the United States actually has the luxury of being able to make a few minor mistakes. They're not game-ending mistakes. At the worst, they may delay a successful diplomatic conclusion or a military conclusion to the U.S.-Iran war. They're not showstoppers yet. So I would say the blockade that the U.S. has imposed in the Straits of Hormuz in an effort to force Iran to say, okay, enough. And Trump is making, very, very bold and to some very radical statements on how that how the radical statements on the consequences for Iran if it fails to negotiate and come to the table and negotiate peace. So it's too short a time period for us to draw a definitive conclusion that the U.S. efforts against Iran have failed or are about to meet failure. But I would say, just as 4 years ago, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, no one was prepared to say, "Oh, Ukraine is going to kick their tails and send them running back to Russia." It took some time. It took some time for Ukraine to adjust, but they successfully did it. I don't think it will take nearly that much time to force Iran to realize that this is not a battle they can win, that they need to make peace. So I would say,
or United States.
Say again,
Jonathan. Or United States.
Yeah. So really,
are Iranians getting extremely frustrated with both Kushner and Witkov? They're saying that they have no clue what they're talking about. They have no knowledge of nothing, absolutely. And whatever Vance, when he was participating, every few minutes or so, he had to run out of the room to make a telephone call. about certain questions, and they couldn't figure out whom he is calling, because Trump at exactly that time, he was busy on some activities outside of the White House, so he could not be reached. Apparently, they solved it. They were calling to Netanyahu for his advice and his wisdom and knowledge and so on. So this is how United States has negotiations, and most of the times it's using these negotiations as to bring leaders of, let's say, Iran or any other country to certain location, and they eliminate them physically. So maybe it's not going to happen in Pakistan, I don't think so, but anywhere else it could. So I don't know.
It's right now. The performance of U.S. diplomatic efforts with Iran is not something that I would put on my resume if I were looking for a future job. I would leave that blank and say, okay, well, let's forget about that. So right now, again, it's actually, it reminds me of something that one of my superiors, when I was stationed out at Huachuca, and I had first come into the Army as a lieutenant with a PhD, and he said to me, he says, "Jonathan, your career is going to be interesting to watch, but dangerous to emulate." Okay, yeah, I learned the truth. I learned the truth of that years later. So I would say the performance of the U.S. diplomatic efforts with Iran right now, and with I would consider that the same thing. Interesting to watch, dangerous to emulate. So,
I'll tell you that, in my opinion, Trump basically surrounded himself with the people who are more like himself, but on a lower level. All his cabinet, they're all multi-billionaires, and some of them, Trump made them to earn all this cash. And Trump himself did very well during his first year of presidency. So the people with the knowledge in diplomacy and so on, and throughout all these years since Second World War, America was shining as the most skillful in diplomacy and everywhere. Especially, it's so easy because it was backed by enormous U.S. Army and war machine. So right now is okay, Army and war machine. Okay, you can support by money, a lot of money, and if it's not enough, even more money. But the knowledge, the expertise, when you don't have it, it's very difficult to constitute that and bring it back, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's a saying. It says, an army of rabbits led by a lion is much more effective than an army of lions led by a rabbit. So
it's true. Yeah, exactly. Ukraine is doing well. I'm waiting for the first tranche. Sometimes money is not important, but a lot of money is very important. And especially if Zelensky makes a proposition that they can get by without American weapons, that means that the funds have to be there now, almost any day. First week of May, first day of May, whatever it might be, we need this money in Ukraine, and then Ukraine can confidently look into its future. In the meantime, thank you very much for today's program. Slava Ukraini.
God bless America. Yeah.
Yes, of
course.
Slava. And Canada as well. And we'll see you on Friday, same place, same time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.